into some news that broke yesterday. It's kind of hardware news, but like the question that the community brought up is, will the Steam Deck, a Switch-like power, high power PC NVMe device, run Final Fantasy XIV? And so I want to get Chris's thoughts on this, because we've always kind of like, we've advocated that Final Fantasy XIV should come to the Nintendo Switch. But now in this case, like, this is a device that has the power, like has the processor, it's got the speed. So what do you think, Chris?
So when asked this question, not to the Steam Deck specifically, but to any platform, anytime it comes up, the CEO of Square Enix and Yoshi P have made it incredibly clear publicly. We want to be as many places gamers are as possible. When you ask for more detail, the reason they are not is because there is time and resources that goes into that. It takes a long time, and they support a lot of versions of this game, and they spend a lot of effort trying to keep consistent content up. And so they have to make sure that the desire to bring on a new platform where they don't have players is not going to detract from their ability to deliver to the existing base. And so it is a question of how well set up is it to just receive how it runs on Steam. Like if there's no work there, or if Steam says, hey, we're looking to set up a team to help with integrations, we're looking to pay for part of that. When I worked in the medical space, there was this give and take when we would have integrations with medical systems on whose staff is handling the troubleshooting, whose staff is handling the integrations, whose staff is setting everything up, who's paying if there's a third-party vendor making the go-between, because with personal health data, it gets really touchy really fast. And so like who's paying for it and who's spending the time on it. And so if we're able to provide staff members to oversee it, or if we're able to say, hey, this is going to cost $50,000, we would love to pay $30,000 of it, or we can provide this other service that saves you $30,000 somewhere else. Yeah. Those sorts of conversations are not public for very good reason. That's the drawback. So if it's not, that would be why. But if it's an easy conversion, I don't see why not.
So let's, I'm going to help define some technical reasons why it's not native on Steam Deck or any kind of Steam device. Steam runs SteamOS, which is a Linux build. And right now, Final Fantasy XIV does not support a Linux build. It can run on Linux via Wine and things like that. But as far as it goes, you can also run Windows on the Steam Deck. You can install Windows, and you can install any game that runs on Windows on a Windows machine. So
the Mac version's still Wine-based, right?
I think so, yeah. I think
so. Anytime I'm having an issue with the Mac version, that's likely because it's a Wine wrapper.
Right. So in case of Yoshi P and his team, will they support Linux? Well, the answer could be possibly. I wouldn't expect that before Endwalker. I would expect that it probably is going to be on the roadmap for more and more people, and here's why. Final Fantasy XI, not Final Fantasy XI, daggum all these numbers. Windows 11 is having more and more closer to a kind of a Linux kernel than ever before. So there is a lot of power in Linux. You use a Linux device every day. If you're listening to this, Linux is being used to power a lot of cloud. When I was like looking at, always debating, like, should I continue to stay independent? Should I go, etc.? I had my resume, and they're like, and getting a lot of questions of how much Linux do I know? It's like, okay, I need to be, working more and more in Linux. Stadia, its backbone, Linux. And so essentially, like, if they were ever to do that, like, you could see that point, like, if Final Fantasy XIV comes to Stadia, like, then the question is, why is it not naturally on SteamOS? Because it's, it's Linux. Like, obviously, probably maybe a little bit of work there, but maybe not so much that it, that it's going to be like, hey, you're going to write a native Mac client. Same concept with Xbox, but the specs alone are interesting. Go ahead.
So does that make the Steam Deck a beneficiary of a move to cloud? So if they move to cloud, what happens is you don't announce Steam Deck. You say, here's all of our new places.
Everything.
And so if you roll out a Linux client, does that not? So at that point, that kind of actually makes the Microsoft move something. If there's time and energy spent there, depending on obviously they're not going to be equal, because Microsoft is trying very hard to make it easy to jump from PC to Microsoft to Xbox. But outside of that, like if you just got to pull out of a genie bottle, you just got to pull one new version, it sounds like the Linux version would knock down a lot more dominoes.
Yes.
It would knock down a lot more kind of
right.
When they've been talking about things like the Oceania data center, when they've been talking about bringing new servers online, when they've been talking about rebuilding old systems in the back end, things like the companion system, working on things like the trust system, doing the stat squish, getting, you know, a lot of these changes that we've been seeing, they've been throwing around terms like these are 10-year choices. They've been throwing around terms where, yes, 6.0 is going to be the finale of the story, but hardware wise, game systems wise, we are looking out a decade or more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 1,000%. Also, when it comes to the Steam Deck itself, it runs, you can run a Chromium based browser on it, meaning you have access to xCloud. You have access to all the games on the xCloud, Microsoft. You have all the games access on Stadia. Steam, in this case, is not limiting itself to its only store. So even if, just like with Switch, like you can actually run Stadia on Switch, you can run Stadia on your Xbox. So the question is that, well, I wonder if one day PlayStation will, you know, kind of bend the knee and let, you know, xCloud run in its browser, because the whole Bethesda thing, you know, if you're like, oh, it's exclusive. It's only exclusive if PlayStation decides not to support a Chromium browser on the platform, because that's how you're going to access these systems wherever you are. But go ahead.
The typical pushback on cloud is internet access. And for a game that already relies on
100% on internet,
a reliable internet connection, I think the percentage of people that have access to the level of internet connection you need is probably much higher than the general population, because all the people who just don't have good internet at all, they're already not playing 14.
Yeah.
You know, they're already not doing online games as a large portion of their content consumption. So if a cloud solution has, let's say, 20% of the population in the United States geographically, not population density, has access to the level of internet you need, when you filter down to MMORPG players, I think that percentage probably likely spikes, because you've already ruled out, there's already a lot of people that have frustrations with this game. So, like, we've talked about this before, but MMORPGs seem primed to be the first games to start having part or even all of their backbones moving to cloud-based solutions, where you're saying, hey, you know, when Limsa has 5,000 people on it,
done. We got
your local machine doesn't need to really deal with that. We'll do the heavy lifting, and you just do the pretty stuff at the end. We're all set.
That's why I've said we have yet to experience the golden age of the MMORPG. That's why I say that what we used to define as MMO is done in every platform, you know, right now. Like, where MMO, massively multiplayer, exists in all kinds of genres, not just the MMORPG, what we play with Final Fantasy. But what you just described is essentially the future that I see in, you know, granted, there's still plenty of roadmap, but that's where with Steam Deck itself, I look at that as the perfect cloud local, you know, hybrid, right? Oh, you're not in Wi-Fi? Like, download the game. If it's supported locally, you can keep playing. And then essentially, like, oh, if you're home, you're on like Wi-Fi, you got fast internet, you can stream any game that's possible from this handheld device. And that's essentially what I think will be interesting ultimately see. But to that point about the MMORPG and its evolution, you're right. You can throw thousands of servers and graphics cards, you know, there's 10,000 people, 20,000 people, like, all in this space, and it runs smoothly and it's great. Now the question is it fun?
Well, yes, fun has to be. When we talked about the Yoshipi's slideshow from his development conference panel, kind of came out, and like one of the things that was on it was like fun. That's the thing that's hard to add later. So that simply having the hardware doesn't give you a guarantee. But the really cool stuff is that when you start to have this much hardware, when you start to say, okay, it's not 10,000 players running 10,000 individual solo graphics cards. It's 10,000 players sharing a pool of 10,000 graphics cards. You get to start tackling things like, you hear these terms like negative latency. You get to start tackling these terms that are impossible in the way games work now. Negative latency, the theory is we're just going to pre-render the future. We're just going to take a guess. Here's the options of where we think players are going to go next, and we'll pre-do calculations around those, so that when you send the request, some of the work is already done. We're just grabbing which package you chose, and then we're throwing the other ones in the bin. And so there's concepts here where you get to start to say, okay, in something like Fortnite, where you have 100 people in real time that are all looking at the same bush, why am I having that that little plant rendered 10, 100 times separately as separate calculations. How do we share some of that? Like, it seems like I'm redoing the same work over and over and over and over. And so there's some really cool stuff that gets way beyond my brain really fast when you talk about like what really sets Stadia apart. To the average user, Stadia right now for many players is just a harder to use GeForce. Like it just, they're not getting to see what makes Stadia truly incredible because there hasn't been a game built to take advantage of it.
100%. And that's one of the things that's most exciting about what Square Enix announced 2 years ago. Like, they have games in development that are cloud only. And the question is that, and I don't know if the first games that are cloud only are going to blow everybody's mind, because that's the problem. Like,
no,
because like
they'll be like the first VR games.
Like,
there'll be Beat Saber and then other games. Like there will
yeah.
be one good cloud game, and then it's like 100 cloud games came out this year. Yeah, but did you play that one?
Yeah.
Well, it is just the one, isn't it? Like there one will make it.
But it'll be interesting to see, because sometimes that art being constrained by being constrained by just like physical and like physics limitations in hardware, processing powers and things like that, is something that has made some of the greatest games of all time. We say it here all the time. Gameplay is king when it comes to games. You can make the prettiest, piece of art, but if it's, has no good gameplay, then what are we doing? I see Chad also kind of memeing on, like, I would never play Final Fantasy or an MMO on a handheld device. I was like, well, I guess you don't really craft or gather, because I played 14 on the Vita, and it's like, I wouldn't do a dungeon on it, but it was nice to kind of go and just kind of craft and gather a little bit here and there. As just a supplementary piece of hardware. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. And so my background is not nearly as technical as Brian's. And so I went to school for design. I'm the artsy one in my family. And one of the things that we were taught is that design flourishes in constraint. That it's one of the reasons that, I see Yoshi P as being really good at fixing games. And when people are like, he's going to be really good at making a game from scratch. And I'm not saying he won't be, but I'm saying temper your expectations, because it's a different skill set. He possibly has both. It is possible he is the world's first primal running around, him and Soken as the two primals in the real world. It is possible.
Yeah.
But like, it's not impossible that his first one is a learning experience, and then his second Scratch title is even better, because it's a different skill set. And so operating within constraint, is a different way to solve problems, and it creates a lot of really beautiful solutions, and they're beautiful because of the way they deal with problems, not because you got to just. And so studying architecture, they said, like, there is no one perfect building that you just design in space and then you could just drop anywhere in the world. It has to be respectful of where and when and what it's built for. That's what makes it beautiful design. So there's some context there. So I think the problem with cloud storage right now is it seems like it's lifted the constraints, and we've got to learn to operate within what the new constraints are. And those new constraints, the new bounds, they're so far out there that I just don't know that anybody's really really ready to test the space. I don't know that anybody saw this level coming or had the resources to invest in what it would take to take advantage of it.
Thank you so much for checking out this highlight from Epic Loot Radio. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe button, and more. And check out our other channels, Ginger Gaming Radio, Ginger Prime, and Work to Game for more content. Thanks for being here, and you're awesome.